Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. This is part 8 of the 12-part webinar series on the 90-day business sprints, hosted by Chris Snyder, the CEO and president of the Exit Planning Institute, as well as the awarded Thought Leader of the Year. Before I turn it over to Chris, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. My name is Josh Koza, and I'm the Client Experience Manager here at EPI. And as you probably know, these webinars are recorded, and we will send out a recording after the session is over today. So look for an email from myself or Drew English with the recording from today's session. In addition, if you have any questions, please use the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll relay any of those to Chris to answer once he has finished with his portion of the presentation. But at this time, I will go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
All right, thanks, Josh, and hi, everybody. Welcome to our 8th webinar on the 11 actions. This month, we're going to talk about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. It revolves around the my favorite chapter in my book, chapter 8, which is relentless execution. So we're on action number 7, ground plans and action relentlessly execute. And if you recall, we've been covering over the last few months the 4 core concepts, which are written about in section 2 of the book. And this is, last month we talked about the 4 C's. Month before that, we talked about the Value Maturity Index. Earlier in the year, we talked about the 3 legs of the stool, focusing on personal planning. And today, like I say, we're going to cover chapter 8, which is relentless execution. Now, the thing about relentless execution is all of the things that we talk about in terms of concepts, plans, process maps, assessments, valuations, all these different things that we've been talking about is really just that. It's just talk. They're great concepts. They're intellectually stimulating. They may be even intellectually moving, but they don't really mean anything unless we're able to implement them. And that means creating change in our organizations to be able to adopt these concepts and internalize them to make our companies run better, faster, and to drive more value into them. And so that's why it's really important to me, and it's a key part of the value acceleration methodology. And I always say, value acceleration is grounded in action because it is only through action that we're able to make our visions, come to reality. And so a lot of us in our own companies, in our own firms, and even if you're working with another customer in their particular companies, it's almost been a I don't know, I'd say it's a dream, but I mean, it's something that I focus on is the question, why is it that some companies repeatedly get things done while others continually fail to achieve plans? And I was working for Price Waterhouse all those years, and boy, they pay us some pretty significant dollars to come in and help them develop strategies. And then they take our strategies and they basically just put them on the shelf. And there was an article I was reading recently where the managing director of a firm said he had been brought in and to evaluate, a company's strategy and their direction. And as part of the materials that he was reviewing, there were 3 consultants that had been in there prior. And when he read their reports, he realized that the conclusions that they were drawing in this present engagement were the same that the previous 3 had already concluded and delivered to the executive team several years prior. And so it gets back to that question of, if we don't implement these ideas, they're just words, and they're not much more than that. Now, there are, just like 20 to 30% of the companies do successfully transition, there are companies that do continually achieve their objectives. And again, the question would be, what can we learn from them? What are they doing that the other companies aren't? But when you think about this challenge that we have, this implementation challenge, it's really one of the biggest unaddressed issues in the business world today. Larry Bossidy, in his book, Execution, I think this is a great quote that addresses that. Execution, Larry said, is the great unaddressed issue in the business world today. Its absence is the single biggest obstacle to success. And so this is a challenge in many organizations where they have these beautiful, well thought out strategies that never seem to achieve their objectives or get implemented. Great ideas that surface all the time that never find a home in implementation. So that's what we're going to try to address. How can we come up with a process that takes our visions and makes them reality? And I think as I talk about it in this particular chapter, I think it comes down to 4 primary things: vision, alignment, accountability, and rhythm. Those 4 things sort of make up good execution in companies. Those companies that do execute well typically have characteristics in each one of these categories that allow them to be relentless executors. Where we are in our process is, if you think back to some of the previous webinars, we've done the triggering event. Now, the triggering event, as we previously explained, is very important because it sets the baseline for what you're going to do going forward. So the triggering event is a personal financial business assessment correlated to range of value. And remember, that's the first deliverable we're going to do in the value acceleration process. And then from there, the other benefit of the triggering event is not only will it tell us where we are, but it will tell us the specific actions that we need to work on. And if we do work on those and do implement improvements related to those value factors, we will see our scores rise, our attractiveness and readiness scores rise. And as our attractiveness readiness scores rise, our position in the range of value will rise. And that is specifically what value acceleration does. It measures that process and gives you a very quantitative natured feedback on the value increases, the value growth increases that you're implementing as a result of implementing these actions. So that's why triggering event is, as we said before, is always first, should never be skipped. And it relates to the identify phase in the value maturity index. The next thing we want to do, though, is now that we kind of know where we are and what the baseline is, and we can make a determine, or what I like to say is a choice to go after value growth, we need a vision and purpose. And we've talked about that before. You need vision and purpose. From vision and purpose become goals and objectives. From goals and objectives, we can create action plans. And then our next step, of course, once we have the action plans, we have to deliver it. Now, one of the keys that I've seen in good delivery is a few things that have to happen in terms of putting your structure together so that you can be a good implementer, a relentless executor. One is you should scope your projects in 90 days. So although we're going to have a long-term vision, which could be out 10 years, we're going to have goals and objectives, which are probably in the 3 to 5 year range. You're going to have action plans that are in the 90-day and 1 year horizons. You really want to scope your 90-day action. You want to scope your actions into 90 days. So you want to be able to build and make a connection between what you're implementing in the next 90 days and how that ties back to the to a step towards completing and achieving your vision and purpose. Next, you want to align the team. You want to develop a rhythm so it becomes internalized within the company. As I say, you do the best you can, and then you're going to recalibrate. And what you're going to do is you're going to get it. I call those 90-day sprints. You're going to get into that process. Every 90 days, you're going to go through that cycle. And as you go through those cycles, you will continuously begin to get better and better and better, just like any type of continuous improvement process. Let's talk about vision and purpose. That's number one. So we had talked previously about the importance of vision, the importance of purpose, and how that is inspirational not just to you as the owner, but also to the rest of the team. That purpose, vision and purpose, needs to be based on your core values. It needs to cover one or two areas of the market where you can dominate, and then you will eventually express that vision in the form of a brand statement. Now, you use a process called creative visualization to do this. And I've suggested and referred in the past a book called The Science of Getting Rich from Wallace D. Wattles. Suggest you read it if you haven't picked one up yet. And Wallace D. Wattles really, studied and practiced creative visualization. What he's talking about here is that we really need to create a clear mental image of what we're trying to create, right? As Wallace D. Wattles says, you cannot transmit the idea unless you have it yourself. And the reason I suggest you go through this process of belief, passion, opportunity, and focus is that if you go through those, if you take your vision and you think about, do I really believe in this vision and why? Am I passionate about the vision and why? I take the time to really define a very detailed mental image of what it will look like, feel like once I arrive. Then I can begin to focus on what do I have to do to achieve it. And that act of creative visualization will help you create your vision and make your vision very vivid and in a fashion that you'll be able to share that vision and share that passion and share the potential opportunity with your staff, who are really going to be critical towards you being a good implementer, right? In fact, the company becoming a relentless executor. And again, the business is personal, so it has to reflect the core values of the company and the core values of the owner and the owner's family. And third, like I said, is you really need to, as you're doing this, you need to be thinking about what one or two areas that you're going to dominate in the market. Now, I talk a little bit about this in my book, about how the markets have changed over the last 20 or 30 years. It used to be, in the older days, right, everybody tried to reside in the middle. So if you had specialization on one side and generalization on the other, most people tried to be somewhere in the middle, all things to all people. But what's happened in our marketplaces over the last few decades is really companies being forced to choose between being a mass marketer or someone that specializes. A mass marketer, for example, would be somebody like a Home Depot or a Walmart, the big box retailers. Their mission is to push a lot of product through at a low price. And they're even willing, they won't admit this, but they're willing to sacrifice some service and specialization in order to push product through their facilities as quickly as possible and as inexpensively as possible to attract you. So they really compete on price and convenience. On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, you have specialization. And that's where a lot of our lower to middle market, even some of the upper middle market privately held businesses reside. We've been forced in response to the big retailers, and I would even throw Amazon, for example, in there as well right now, to really be able to compete with these mass producers to develop specialization. So specialized services. Example might be Flexalloy, a company I talk about in my book, The Perfect Exit. Flexalloy was specialized in just-in-time fastener distribution to heavy equipment and truck manufacturers. And through that specialization, we were able to go in and dominate that market. So what you really want to do is not just have a vision about where you want to go, but base that vision on one or two areas where you really think you can dominate, and kind of take a step back and think about how do you specialize in your industry and how do you become basically number one or number two in that industry. And that's the basis for how we're going to build a vision, which is necessary to being a good executor, because vision sustains implementations, right? When people hit a wall or they get frustrated, implementation is very difficult. they need that vision, they need that inspiration to keep them going. And even in our organizations now, especially with some of the younger folks in our organization, to attract and retain and motivate really good talent, which you're going to need, human capital, you have to offer them more than just great salary or even a great place to work. They want to be inspired. Of course, you know this, but it's a necessary component to execution, right? You got to make people want to go above and beyond. You need to inspire them. And as I said, then this vision and this mission should be reflected in a brand statement. Here's an example of a brand statement that I'm showing on the screen now, and you can read about it more in chapter 8 of the book. The brand statement really revolves around 4 key areas. One is, what is our mission? Why do we believe we could achieve this mission? What proof do we have? Remember, exit planning, value acceleration is based on fact. So what proof do we have that would support our reason to believe? And what's the tone and manner in which it's going to be like, the experience of doing business with our company? And that means from a customer standpoint, from a supplier standpoint, and even inside within the company, this kind of represents the kind of culture we want to have. As I mentioned, Wallace D. Wallace said, by thought, the thing you want is brought to you, but it's only by action that you receive it. So now that we have this vision, how do we make the vision real is really the next thing we want to try to tackle. And that requires that we get into the details. And this is where a lot of strategies fail. Most strategies cover the first part. They have the vision, they may even understand the market, their target and ideal customers. They develop, well thought out plans of what they want to achieve. They write mission statements, but again, that's all talk. That's talk, and that's not really action. To make the talk real, to turn that talk into action, we need to align our resources to that plan. And this is so alignment really involves all of the planning that's required to get your resources aligned to achieving that vision. And I would suggest that you do this in a few different ways here as you go through this process. We're going to talk about integrated business planning so that we develop integrated business strategies. We'll talk about competencies. You need 3 to 5 themes over the next year. You need to get to 3 to 5 priorities over the next 90 days. You need to use workshops, not meetings, to facilitate this process. And I want to talk a little bit about a document that I call opportunity assessments that I have the champions of each of the priorities do, that allows us to go from basically all the way from the vision all the way down to the specific deliverable that is going to be delivered in the next 90 days. So if you think about it, this is what the real hard analytical work is, and where a lot of plans fall down is they have generic statements of what they want to accomplish, but as Bossidy talks in his book, the plans don't have any details. We find how to accomplish it. In fact, that's so important to me that section 3 of my book is all around how to do value acceleration. I'm a pretty avid reader, and you read these books and they have these great theories and these great concepts, and again, they are intellectually stimulating, but they don't tell you how to do it. Like, that sounds great, I'd love to achieve that, but how do I actually do it? And I wanted a section in my book that went beyond just the concepts and really laid out a detailed process for how to do that. And that starts with an excruciating process of creating action plans. In the value acceleration methodology, it's the second major deliverable of the methodology, and that step alone could take you 90 days to get through, just to get yourself to a detailed plans. Now, I like to think of myself as an implementer, not just a planner, but great planning makes execution needs clear. And what we want to do is we want to go from that vision. From the vision, we'll get some themes. From the themes, we get some projects. From the projects, we get some tasks. From the tasks, we can produce milestones. And those milestones then will produce a deliverable every 90 days. And that deliverable should be tied back to a value factor that you identified in your attractiveness and readiness assessment. And you can see now where we're going with this. We're going to close that loop, because as we improve that deliverable, that value factor, we're going to be able to go back periodically, remeasure, rescore ourselves, and we're going to be able to watch the value of our businesses grow right in front of our eyes. Now, the good planning really starts with a good strategy. And I talked to a lot of the CEPAs that are in the Exit Planning Institute about this. When they say, you know, what's my next step? I just completed CEPA. What do I do next? And I tell them, the next thing you have to do is you have to write a business strategy. It doesn't have to be a 20 or 25 page document. It could be, you know, with my clients, we do a one-page strategy. That's the front and back of one piece of paper. It's got our strategy on it. Or if you feel more comfortable, you can articulate something more detailed than that. But you need some sort of a strategy. But what's more important than the document itself is the process of using workshops with your organization to get your team aligned around the strategy and to make sure your plans between your different functional organizations are aligned and not fighting against each other. So the process I suggest you do in my book is you really start with the customer and identifying the types of customers you have and who your ideal customers are. And that's going to be related to those one or two areas where you think you want to dominate, right? And then as you flow down the pyramid from top to bottom, left side here, the next thing you want to do is think about, okay, how am I going to market and sell to those particular customers? And once marketing comes up with their plan, we can go to the next level and we can say, okay, here's how marketing wants to sell. Here's how we want to sell and market to this customer. How are we going to fulfill the orders when they come in? And once fulfillment has their plan, you can go to the next level, right? And you could talk about the infrastructure that's necessary to support operations and fulfillment. So what facilities do I need? What technology do I need? What people do I need, right? What suppliers and partners may I need? Next, you flow down to the next level, which is finance and legal. And they need to be able to look at the plan and say, okay, if you guys, everybody above you needs all of these resources, here's what it's going to cost. Here's how we're going to finance it. Here are the legal ramifications of the business that we're talking about being in. And the base layer, which I call the business enterprise, is really it's really the structural capital that we talked about in the 4 C's, the management, the metrics, the core values, the priorities, the systems that all of those other functional groups sit and reside on, and that enable them to operate in a best-in-class fashion. Now, as you're talking through these things with your teams, what you're going to find is, as you move down the pyramid, you're going to start to run into constraints. So marketing and sales may say, I want to do this to support this customer, and fulfillment saying, well, we don't have the capability to do that, or we can't do that in a cost-effective way. Or you might go to the next level and your technology would say, we don't have the technology to do that, or we don't have the right competencies or people or talent to be able to do that. Or finance says, you want how much money? Can't spend that kind of money. We don't have that kind of capital involved. So what you want to be able to do is, the reason I have the planning arrow going the other way on the right side, is that there are trade-offs that have to be made between these organizations when the group that supports the organizations above it can't fulfill what they need to complete their goals and objectives. And so what you end up with is this process of going back and forth where the different organizations, functional groups, are making these trade-offs until we can finally get to a point where we think we have a realistic plan that can be implemented. That's what it means. A realistic means we can implement it. It means that it's interdependent and it's integrated within the entire company. And there's just no way around that other than to go through these iterations between the different groups to make sure that your plans are realistic and can be achieved. That's what we're advocating that you do in setting your business strategy. And that's what I talk about, the process I suggest you use in the business modeling pyramid. This is why I advocate you use workshops, not meetings. Every time I say this, I see people when they're live. I could see your eyes right now. I probably see you rolling your eyes. Like, everybody knows I don't want, the last thing I want is another meeting. So we like workshops, because what we're going to do is a workshop has a specific time period, it has a specific goal, and it has an outcome. And so you may have a series of workshops within your organization where you have a 2 or 3 hour session to talk about your customer base and how you should sell and market to them. Then maybe you're going to have another workshop around how your fulfillment is going to needs to plan and what capabilities you need, competencies you need, and fulfillment to meet that sales and marketing plan. And you get the idea. You go down the pyramid. And those sessions will go back and forth and round until you get to a plan that is really achievable. And there's just really no way around that. You have to get into the details of this. This is painful, time consuming, especially the first time through, but it's necessary in order to be great at execution. And I don't know why you wouldn't do it, because of the amount of money and time that we spend on building strategies. We should be spending at least an equal amount of time figuring out how to actually implement the strategy. You have to get into, and you have to build those action plans right down to those 90-day sprints. And you have to connect them back to your 1 year, your 3 year, your 5 year, and ultimately your vision. You have to get into the details of who's responsible, what are the implementation options, what are the deliverables, where are the resources coming from, what are the risks and contingencies if it doesn't work, what are the milestones that demonstrate we're on track, right? Now, when you think about it, milestones are less than 90 days. So when you come up with your action item that you're going to implement in your 90-day sprint, what I like people to do is go to the next level and get to something what I call an opportunity assessment. Now, the opportunity assessment form, so to speak, is, don't take it as an absolute. It's not like a form you fill out. You should view it more as a guideline of things you should be thinking about. If your staff want to use the form, they can use the form if that's helpful. But really, they should be. It's really a tool to help guide them into the kinds of questions they should be asking and answering in looking at how they're going to deliver their 90-day milestone. So we're going to take this thing all the way from vision all the way down to the milestone we're going to begin to implement, which is usually in 30 days or less increments. So if you have say a 90-day priority that you want to implement, you're probably going to have 3, 4, or 5 key milestones, key things that you need to, like interim deliverables that you need to complete, and that will also indicate whether or not the accomplishment of this action item is likely to happen. And we don't want to go 90 days and then realize, well, we didn't have this, we didn't do this, we couldn't make that item happen. We want to know that after 30 days. And usually, again, what I teach the CEPAs is planning is really done backwards. Execution is done forwards. What you want to do with planning is you want to start with what you're going to achieve, the outcome, and then work yourself backwards into looking at the different milestones, the things you have to accomplish along the way that are going to indicate that you're on track or off track. So if you do go off track, which oftentimes many of these things do, we can recognize that early, and we can either correct the situation or we can abandon the priority because we realized we're in the wrong forest, right? So you don't want to continue to pound out something. If you realize 30 days into it, you picked the wrong priority, then stop, right? You can just stop, and then you're not going to waste your time. So remember, not only we should be thinking about things we should start doing, we need to, just as important, to realize things you should stop doing and stop them. So the opportunity assessment, really, what I ask the staff, it's usually the staff that's doing this, whoever the champion is that's been assigned that particular action item, and I'll ask them to articulate. I prefer it be written, because if you have to write it down, it forces you to articulate it a little bit clearer, and to kind of simplify it, because you can't go on and describing it. Description of the pros project or the opportunity or problem, depending on what it is you're trying to address. What are you proposing to do? What is the problem you're trying to solve? A little bit of background. I think it's always good to connect back to the history. Like, why is this up now? Why did this become an important subject? Why was this selected as a priority above all the other things that we could be working on and will be working on? What alternative ways can you approach solving this problem or capitalizing on this opportunity? Of those alternatives you've considered, what which one of them are you suggesting we pursue? What's the timeline and team structure? And then also identify the milestones that you need to achieve that will indicate that you're on track, right? Now, again, as I said, excruciating detail. This is something that once you come out of your 90-day renewal workshop, you're going to assign one of the actions that you've determined as a priority to a champion in your company. And that person, what we typically will do is ask that person to come back to the group within 1 week with an opportunity assessment. And they, as I say, they can turn in the form or they can present back to the group their thinking around how to approach and accomplish this particular action in the next 90 days. One thing I do want to mention here is that I've been talking a lot about the business, but remember, we got to be, our personal, financial, and business needs to be in harmony. So you do the same thing on personal. I just ran a focus group 3 or 4 weeks ago here in Northeast Ohio with a half a dozen business owners. What I said to them is, run your personal life the same way you run your business, right? So when you think about it from a personal and personal financial standpoint, you should have a vision, right? You should have goals and objectives. You should have, which are 3 to 5 years out. You should have a vision that's 10 years out. You should have some 1-year initiatives. You should have some 90-day priorities, and you should have some milestones that you need to hit that will lead you to believe that you're going to accomplish that particular priority in the next 90 days. What you want to do is the same technique. It's no different. Just do it for yourself or your family the same way you do it for your business. Run your life same way you run your business. The same tools, just sort of a different point of view when we're looking at it. All right. The next item now is, so now we've got our vision and our purpose, our inspiration laid out in front of us in enough detail to make it mentally, have a clear mental image of what we're trying to accomplish and what it feels like when we get there. Now we've put together a plan on how we're going to do that. And now we're going to move into delivering actions. And there has to be really accountability. But the point I want to make here is that sometimes I think the word accountability is I don't say necessarily misused, kind of misjudged. Accountability isn't about, beating people up when they don't get things done and, rewarding people that get everything done. It's really a learning experience if you approach it this way. I think you're going to get a lot more out of accountability. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't times, anybody that has worked for me or does work for me now understands that, sometimes, you're going to get your ass kicked. that sometimes does happen and it's deserved. But for the most part, really what I want to know is why? Why did you miss this objective? Why are you off track? And I also want to know why you felt like you were successful, right? I want to understand why, the why behind. 80% of the problems we have in our companies are tied to a bad process, not usually a bad person. Most people in our company are pretty good people. The problem is we have really messed up processes. We have conflicting priorities. We have strategies that aren't integrated, that actually create conflicts. We have reward systems that reward the wrong thing. It's usually the system that's wrong, not the people. I'm not saying that sometimes it isn't the people, and you and I know it usually is, but I mean that it sometimes is, but usually it's the system, the structural capital that's the problem. And so you really want to approach the renewal workshops every 90 days as a learning exercise and give your staff a chance to really talk and dialogue about why things went well or why things didn't go well versus just beating them up if they don't make the objectives. Because let me tell you, when you first start value acceleration process, it isn't going to be easy. We've talked about I'll talk about the WOW curve here in a second, but it's not going to be easy, especially in the beginning as you're learning the new system. And even if you've been on the system, as my company has for several years, nobody bats 1,000, right? If you're getting 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, you're doing pretty good. That's a pretty good ratio. And I'd suggest even if you're getting 5 out of 5 every quarter, then you're not pushing yourself hard enough. But treat it as a learning experience. And so what we do in both the workshops that we run during the implementation phase, during that prepare gate in the methodology, we're typically doing over the quarter, we're doing 3 workshops. We're doing a monthly one-on-one workshop, which is one-on-one between you, whoever the sponsor is of that particular action, which in a smaller company, it could be the owner with the champion. In bigger companies, it could be your CFO with a champion. It could be your COO with a champion, depending whoever the sponsor and the champion are, to have a monthly one-on-one workshop that lasts 2 or 3 hours, and it's a working session where you take that champion's particular action item and you spend 2 or 3 hours a month just working with them, because they typically will need your guidance and help. And but do it in the form of a workshop, not a meeting. It's not a report. Let's sit down, let's get to a board, and let me help you figure this thing out. I think asking our sponsors, our business owners, our executives to do that one-on-one with a priority action item from the company each 90 days is not an unreasonable request. Next is once a month, we want to run a team accountability workshop. And this is where the champions of the priorities will come in once a month, and that's where they report out progress. And basically what they're going to do is they're going to report out progress against the details that they provided in the opportunity assessment. And these meetings, again, usually last, or workshops typically last about 2 or 3 hours. You don't have to go into great detail on these things. What I have my staff do is each staff member picks up when it comes to their turn, it's really only 10 or 15 minutes. All I really want to know is accomplishments and disappointments from the past month. Where are you on track? Where are you off track? And have a little bit about a discussion as to what they need to be successful. Occasionally we get the good news. Somebody says, everything's going great, we don't need any help. But usually it's, I've got this conflict, or I didn't get this resource, and in order for me to get back on track and get this thing done, here's what I need. And then of course it's our job and the team's job to figure out how to either change the goal, modify the deliverable, change what we think the outcome is, or get them the resources they need to get the job done. The quarterly renewal then is something that the entire team, I prefer to do these off-site if it's possible. Typically take about a half a day to do. And we go through the same process: accomplishments, disappointments for the quarter, for the last 90 days, because they're not always on a quarterly basis, they're on a 90-day basis. And then what we'll do is I ask each manager to tell me what the lessons learned were, both good and bad, so that we can repeat the good stuff and talk about how do we fix the bad stuff. And then we'll go around the table and try to talk about what our next 90-day priorities should be. We throw a bunch of stuff on the walls, and then we will go through a process of selecting what we think our top 3, 4, or 5 priorities are for the next 90 days, and then we assign them to a champion. If you totally missed or didn't fully complete a priority in the previous 90 days, that item might be up there again to let's give it another go in the next 90 days, only let's reframe our scope and let's try to approach it this way. I had one of my clients recently had the same item on his personal action plan for 9 months because each 90 days that went by, he couldn't get it done. And mostly it was time he didn't have available, and things that he learned as he approached trying to solve the problem. He realized there were things he didn't know, and the problem was a lot more complicated than he originally thought. And then the other one I would suggest you do is an annual retreat. In my companies, we usually go away. Last year we went to San Diego. Take the core team, out of the office for a few days. We have a little bit of fun. We talk about where we want to be 3 to 5 years down the road. We revisit the vision. We revisit the competencies that we're trying to build, revisit our 5-year targets, and then we start breaking down the 1 year and the 90-day plan for the next 90 days. I think those 4 workshops, if you did them on a regular basis, are going to help you deliver rhythm, which is the last key critical success factor towards relentless execution. Once you've been able to really articulate a vision and get people excited about it, once you've built really strong integrated plans, and now you've started to go through cycles of accountability where you're learning about what you're doing right and wrong as implementers, right? And you do that consistently over 90-day cycles or 90-day sprints, you will begin to develop a rhythm in the company, of a culture within the company, of a company that is really good at getting things done, is really good at executing. I would further suggest that, what you should do is periodically keep score. So again, if you're tying your deliverables back to your attractiveness and readiness value factors, you should be able to go back periodically and say, you know what, this item was a 3 when we set the baseline, and given what we've done over the last 2 90-day cycles or 3 90-day cycles, I'd now score this a 4. And you're starting to take 5 to 10 items every 90 days and work on those factors and raise those scores. Your intangible capital is going to get better. Your scores are going to grow. And I would argue that as those scores grow, as you get better and better at execution and improving those value factors, the other benefit that you're going to see is more sales and income. So, the focus has to be on what do we have to do, what actions need to be completed to drive more sales and income. And if we just focus on the actions, and the sales and the income, will come. I call this process a fast strategy. I like to think of it as a fast strategy. In today's world, the world is so dynamic anymore. Who knows what's going to happen every 90 days. Many things can happen outside of your control as an owner, economic things, political things, social factors. There could be a market disruption, or there could be something personally that happens, health issue, a death in the family, a disagreement with a partner, a divorce. There's so many different things that can throw our plans off track that I think in this dynamic world, we need to be fast. Our organizations need to be able to rebound really quick. They need the strength mentally and emotionally to stay connected to your vision of where you're trying to take your company and what you're trying to do. So I call that fast strategy. Fast strategy is a continual loop of prioritizing, executing, measuring, and reconnecting and recalibrating every 90 days. And those are the kinds of companies that we all want. And now I'll also tell you, those are the kind of companies that'll sell at a premium in a market, or if you're transferring it to your son or daughter employees, it's a good chance that you're going to receive the full payout, maybe then some, of the value of your business. Now, the last thing I want to cover before we wrap it up is what we call the WOW curve. Now, this was created by a CEPA in Australia, a former partner of mine, a guy by the name of Craig West. And he had this idea of this WOW curve, and I've always loved it, and I've always shared it with people, because I think it's a great concept for you to understand. Your biggest challenge, even if you get these systems in place and you get your organization around it, is going to be sustaining the energy on these efforts over the long term. So Craig depicted it in this graph, which he calls the WOW curve. What he typically saw, and I concur, is that in the beginning when we meet with owners, if we're looking at a scale here of enthusiasm, measuring owner enthusiasm on a scale of 1 to 6, what we typically see is as we begin to educate the owner about value acceleration, they get very excited. So if 6 is the maximum, they're at like a 5. They're like really pumped up. They're like, this makes a lot of good sense. All this stuff makes good sense. I think I'd like to try it. And so what we do is we then say, well, the first step is to go through the triggering event, and we send them our request for information. And when they see that, they immediately plummet down to about a 2, because when they see all the information we need to get the triggering event done, they're usually like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? But once we deliver the triggering event, the results, and have that that workshop with them where we're discussing the results of their attractiveness and readiness and their valuation and their position in the range of value, their enthusiasm goes way up again, back up to a 5. And they're saying, this was worth it. Nobody really looked at my business. I don't think I've really looked at my business like this before. And they say, so let's go forward. What we found is the reason we call it a triggering event is that 70% of the time, owners that go through that process go forward with action. So 7 out of 10 owners at that point are going to say, let's go forward. As we begin to implement the changes, the action items over the course of our 90-day sprints, we see this slow, steady decline over about the next 9 months or so, 12 months or so, where the enthusiasm falls to a low point at usually about 12 months out. It's at that point that if an owner is going to jump off the value acceleration train, that's where they jump off. And but if they can get past that inflection point, they're usually home free, and they're at that point they've adopted value acceleration and they've internalized it in the way they run their business, and they'll begin to see the value of their business substantially improve. Now, why do they fall off at that point? Well, the thing is when we start doing value acceleration, as we've talked about in the creating action plans, there is a process, a set of prioritization process of types of actions that we're taking on. In the beginning of your value acceleration effort, you're going to be doing de-risking things. Remember, in the value maturity index, we identify, we protect, and then we build. So your first set of actions should be revolving around de-risking the business. And those aren't usually expensive. They're not usually too disruptive, and they usually can get done pretty quickly. And I like to do those first, not only because it adds immediate value to the business. Even if you're not interested in growing it, you should at least de-risk it. But because they're easy to do, it gives you a lot of quick wins, and it starts to help build momentum. After we get done with de-risking, we're going to move into efficiency. And now with efficiency projects, we're really getting into the way you operate the company. We're looking at ways to reduce cost of sales. We're looking at the selling processes. We're looking at a way to reduce overhead. And that's starting to get deeper into the structural capital of the company and the customer capital and the human capital and how we actually achieve these things, our processes and systems behind it. That usually requires change. And that's when you get a lot of chatter, a lot of back feed to the owner, and a lot of complaints because now people are being forced to change. Now what Craig does is he knows this is going to happen. He's seen it many times, and so have I. When you get to that low point where you hit bottom, what Craig does, and if you work with me, I'll do it too, is he sends you a bottle of champagne. So he'll tell you at the beginning, if you, this is what's going to happen. And when you get to this low point, I'm going to send you a bottle of champagne so that you remember that we had this discussion, and it's nothing else. It's a reminder. Stick with it. Keep it going. It'll get better after this. Because if you can get through that inflection point, all of a sudden you start experiencing growth and you start really realizing a change in culture. And so I want to share this with you because the biggest challenge I see with business owners is they jump off too early. When the going gets tough, they jump off. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong, and I have a number of companies I've worked with where they'll take a break, but they don't really jump off. They might say, look, we need a break right now because we just have this situation we need to work with. And I'll have companies I work with, they'll go away for 3 months, they may even go away for 6 months, but they almost always come back and get started again. So there's nothing wrong if you got to get a point where you got to take a break. Usually what happens is, you can implement change faster than you can absorb it. Implementing it and absorbing it are two different things. It usually takes an organization a little bit longer to absorb that change, get used to it, and internalize it. So sometimes you can move too fast on these projects. So all you want to do is slow it down. Instead of taking on 5 priorities for the quarter, take on 3 or take on 1. The point is to build that rhythm into your company so that the company becomes an organization that knows how to scope, is realistic about what they can achieve, and is willing to persevere through all the difficulties 90 days after 90 days, right? How do you tackle a big problem? You chip away at it. So your homework over the next 30 days is I just want you to evaluate how well your organization regularly produces results. Just think about that. If you have a business strategy, how well has that gone? Some of you, my guess is probably going to be about 10 or 15% of you are going to say, you know what, my strategy is going great. But the vast majority of you probably have strategies that haven't been implemented or aren't being implemented as fast as you'd like to see them implemented. And this is giving you an opportunity to take a pause and really look at the systems that you're using to reinforce action within your companies. Our next webinar is going to be on September 7th from 1 to 2 p.m. I want to just remind everybody that's a date change. I had to pull that webinar up a little bit because of our summit, which is coming up the following week. And now that we're through the 4 concepts, I'm going to cover the value acceleration methodology itself. I'm going to go through the different gates, what's delivered in each gate. And I think now that you sort of have an understanding of the 4 core concepts that need to be adopted, I can introduce the value acceleration methodology to you. And we're going to go through the management system and the methodology in the next webinar. Also want to remind you that we have several upcoming owners forums. Happy to say that we were out in San Francisco, and so that was a big success. We had tremendous help from the University of San Francisco and Sean Hutchinson, the chapter president out in San Francisco, and my good friend. We had about 80 to 90 business owners, I think is what the number ended up being, attend for the full day. And I know from being there that I had several owners come up to me afterwards and said they got a tremendous amount of benefit from attending. My favorite was at the end as we were wrapping up, and Sean was asking everybody what they got out of it, and one of the business owners raised his hand and he said, the main thing I got out of this is a new paradigm about what exit planning is. That exit planning is really nothing more than just good business practice. And I couldn't be more delighted when I heard them say that, because that's, as you know, as we've been talking, that's really all exit planning is. It's a strategic tool that will allow you to build value into your business, improve your sales and income today, right, while guiding you into your best act. Thanks everybody for attending today, and I will see you next month. Josh, back to you.
All right, thanks, Chris. Hey, there was one question that had come in, and if anyone else has them, feel free to type them in quickly now. But the one question that did come in, Chris, is where does defining the mission relate to vision and purpose?
So you're going to have your vision and your purpose, but what you're going to want to do is you're going to express that in something that's a little bit more practical in terms of the mission. So your mission should come out of the vision of where you want to take the company.
Okay. Well, it looks like that's the only question we had now. So if you have follow-up questions, feel free to send them in here to EPI, to myself or Drew or anyone here, and we can get them answered for you, get them over to Chris. But I want to thank you all again for attending today. Thanks, Chris, for the presentation, and keep an eye out for an email shortly. We'll have a recording of this session out to all of you to go back and review and reference. So with that, we'll close things down. So thanks again, and have a great day.
Cheers. Bye-bye.